This game might be in pre-alpha, but right now it's probably the one game on Roblox that I can't wait to be finished. The weapon systems, the movement, the weapon models, and more in its current state are amazing, and I'll be getting into that more in just a moment. Adrenaline was released just a few months ago on October 10th, 2024, and was released by Innovative Playworks. With a relatively small team of around 10 people, this game seems to be very in-depth with its weapon models and systems, but there will be a slight issue that will come up later and more in-depth during the pros and cons section, so stick around for that. The main menu feels very simple with a loadout tab, a surprisingly large settings tab that allows you to toggle things like a speedometer, bullet tracers, blood VFX, and more. And then you have the obvious keyboard and mouse settings and main menu music volume. The loadout tab allows you to have 10 loadouts, and in the game's current state, there are around 6 primary weapons, 3 secondary, and 2 melee weapons available to use. With no level restrictions as of yet, which made my idea for this video quite a lot easier, the attachments weren't capped to a level either. Admittedly, there aren't many attachments to begin with, so it's not like it made a massive difference. For this video, since it's in pre-alpha and it's hard to talk about the video without it being 3 minutes long, I'll be going through each of the weapons that are available, listing some of the more important parts about them and how well they actually operate, as well as noting down other things that I noticed within the game as we go through each weapon together. So without waiting any longer, it's time to get started with the first weapon. The first weapon I went for was the M4A1 with some simple attachments like a reflex scope and a vertical grip. Another thing to note is how in-depth the weapon stats are for each weapon and how well they reflect for each new attachment you decide to put on. Going into the first match, we end up on this fairly close map with some buildings to run around and get cover in, with a very wide open middle area which made for some pretty interesting fights. The first thing that I noticed was the movement tech that some people were using to launch themselves forward and drop shot me countless times, but because I'm simply better, I won every single time. Okay, I won almost every single time. Okay, maybe I'm not amazing at countering it, but trust me, it's my first match. I didn't know how to do it exactly, but I noticed that it was somewhat similar if I had jumped then hit crouch, since at the same time, I didn't know what the button was for going prone. After I learned that, I was finally able to get some more kills. Another thing that I had noticed was that you could end up running along and climbing the edge of the map, which wasn't too fun to deal with, especially when there were times that I could barely see the enemy. In terms of the weapon itself though, it performs pretty standard, doing around 30 to 34 damage per hit, or around 45 with a headshot. The recoil was fairly easy to control, and I was able to get kills fairly quickly and easily with it. I'd have to give this weapon a fairly high 8 out of 10 for its easy to understand recoil, fairly good damage, and range. But after the end of the game, we had won the match and had ended up getting close to 20 kills, which was nearly the most out of the entire lobby. The first match was fairly good in my opinion, the map was fun to play on with numerous different heights and angles to use, and paired with my M4A1, it was certainly a good introduction to the game itself. For the next weapon, I decided to go past the carbines and went for the AKM, with shockingly only one attachment, a reflex scope. We'd up on this construction site looking map with tons of different areas to fight in, different height angles, and it was just a fairly large map overall that was pretty fun to explore. The firing speed of the AKM is slightly slower than the M4A1, but still carries around the same damage as the other one, which would make sense since the two weapons tend to carry the same caliber. The AKM might have a slightly longer range, but I honestly couldn't tell for sure. The TDM game mode was pretty fun and offered a more arcade style to this game in its current state, and avoided the issue of trying to capture the point that is in the middle of the most open spot in the map. I'd also learned how to do the prone dive after looking in the settings and figuring out which button it actually was. And finally, it was time to destroy the lobby. Okay, maybe it didn't work perfectly, and I was probably just better off not using it, but it's whatever. Let's just focus on the kills that I did get, which wasn't a ton, but regardless, this match was quite fun, and I'd have to give the AKM a 7 out of 10. It shoots quite a lot slower than the M4A1, while still carrying the same damage, and in a super fast-paced game, it might not be the best pick overall. Might be worth it on certain maps, but regardless, it's not my favorite. The next map is one that I certainly had an issue with, but I won't get too far into it now, but rather focus on it more during the pros and cons section, but you might see my initial issues when we actually get into it. The next weapon I chose was the Shack-12, a heavy hitting battle rifle that carries quite the punch, doing around 40 damage regularly, or upwards of 70 for a headshot. I decided to put a couple attachments on it, nothing crazy however, just a reflex scope, suppressor, and a vertical grip. Spawning in, I'm greeted with an incredibly open map, perhaps a bit too open. It was certainly a confusing looking map with a lot of wide open spaces and not a lot of cover for the people playing on the opposite side. But regardless, the Shack-12 was doing an insane amount of damage. I would be able to get a kill in around 3 to 4 bullets, and even less if I had managed to land a headshot. My performance in this map wasn't incredible, and that was mainly due to the fact that I was getting head glitched by a lot of the higher up portions of the map that I wasn't able to hit accurately enough with the fairly rough jump of the Shack-12. We did end up losing that match overall, and that was mainly due to the fact that the hill was basically sitting in the open and was typically located towards the other end of the map, leading our team to not be able to push as easily. As for the weapon itself, I'd have to give it a high 9 out of 10. The damage is super high, and even though it fires quite a lot slower, it makes up for it with a super long range and high damage at those ranges. I would say that it might be more suited for those more open and long range based maps, but regardless, I enjoyed that gun quite a bit. Moving away from the rifles, we finally get to check out the submachine guns. The first one I went for was the AR-9, which looks fairly similar to the M4A1, but with a smaller mag and different caliber. I added a heavy suppressor, vertical grip, and a reflex scope, and I don't think I need to do much explaining for this gun, so just look at some of the gameplay and let me know if you think it's any good. But because it's a video, I'll still explain just a little bit. The fire rate is super fast, and with an average damage of 25 to 30 per bullet and its super fast fire rate, this thing shreds people relatively fast and is definitely suited for a more close range map like this one. You can still shoot at a medium range, but it's not amazing and it may end up causing you to die more frequently. There was virtually no recoil. It might have been assisted with the vertical grip that I was using, but I highly doubt it caused that big of a difference overall. This gun was probably my favorite to use out of all of them. It's a fast firing gun with a good amount of damage and is going to have to be a 10 out of 10 for me. I felt like I had performed the best overall with this gun, and in terms of how well it performed on all the boxes, it has to be a 10. After that, we have 2 more weapons left to explore, and we're going to stick with the SMG for this one. The SR3M is the next on the list, and as usual, I added a suppressor, vertical grip, and a reflex scope. Personally, I can't wait for more attachments and weapons to be added. With how the game operates currently, I'm very excited for the future of this game. We end up on a different map that's quite large, definitely larger than any of the other ones that we played up until this point. As for the weapon itself, it performs fairly standard and feels a little bit more on the damaging side, doing around 28 to 29 damage on average, with headshots obviously doing more. With this high damage output leaves us with the issue of the weapon's recoil being a little bit more rough and difficult to control, as opposed to the other weapons that we have been using up until this point. In terms of the map, I definitely like how open and differentiating in terrain and heights it is. It offers so many different angles of play, and even in its pre-alpha state, it feels like a fully completed map with the obvious placeholders here and there. I don't think I've said it before, but the weapons themselves have such amazing models and feel better than some of the games that I've covered on this channel before. For being just a couple months old, it's really shocking how well they actually look and feel, even having the in-depth stat charts that I showed earlier as well. Our team managed to shockingly come out on top after a fairly rough start, and as for my own performance, it was decent if anything. The recoil difference on some of these weapons, especially for a first impression, can lead me to be a little bit off when swapping weapons every match, but that's more of a user error anyway. Overall, this gun would have to get an 8 out of 10. It fires fast, it does a good amount of damage, and the recoil isn't that bad. It performs pretty much how you'd expect an SMG to perform. The last gun. One more to go and we're actually going back to the carbine rifles. Remember that other one that I missed when I started with the M4A1? Yeah, that one. This is the M16A1, a burst rifle that does similar damage to the M4A1, but shoots just a little bit faster from what I've seen. Shockingly, this weapon has 0 attachments available, but that won't matter once I get into it. And speaking of getting into it, well, let's get into it. Right away, the gun feels like it does more damage, even though it technically does around the same as the M4A1. I don't know if it was because of the iron sights or one. Right away, the gun feels like it does more damage, even though it technically does around the same as the M4A1. I don't know if it was because of the iron sights or what, but it felt like I was able to hit people 10 times easier without using the reflex scope that I was using, or if the gun was just that good. We ended up back on the same map as the last match, which was nice because I didn't have to worry about going back to one of the previous ones. I can just hone my skills with this map and not have to worry about getting that map. The game mode was a bit confusing, however. It just said HP at the top, and I didn't really know what that meant, but after watching over the footage, it just seems like a King of the Hill game mode, just worded a little bit differently. As for the gun I was using, this gun was working amazing for me. It felt like I was able to get a ton of kills, even getting a pentakill towards the end of the match. Overall, this weapon felt fairly easy and fun to use, even though it didn't have any attachments for it. The damage was fairly similar to the other ARs that I had been using, but it definitely felt like I was able to shoot a little bit faster. This one's going to have to get a high 9 out of 10 for me. It's fast shooting, hard hitting, and overall a really good weapon, even though you have to use it without any attachments, for right now at least. With all of those weapons and matches out of the way, it's time to see the best and worst of this game with my not patented and definitely not copyrighted segment, the pros and cons section. The pros. The weapons feel fairly balanced for each one, and regardless of your playstyle, you can pretty much use whatever weapon and still have a fun time. The weapon models are incredible, they look like something out of a AAA game, and you can clearly tell that the developers care quite a lot about them. The movement is addicting and super fun to run around with. The arcade style of the game allows for different movement tactics like the prone and crouch dive, which just adds another layer to this game's already fun gameplay. The sound feels perfect. I feel like I could clearly and accurately locate enemies through sound without having to worry about it sounding like someone is behind me, when in reality they were to my right. The overall graphics, even though the maps aren't fully completed, feel really polished. The character models, lighting, and shadows seem very well done for a game it's in a pre-alpha state. There are a good amount of game modes like King of the Hill, TDM, HP, all of which are fun to play and fits really well with the game's arcade style. The cons. This one is solely about the map that I had an issue with, and before you come at me in the comments about it, let me explain. The map that I had played on for the Shack 12 wasn't even close to a finished map. Even in a pre-alpha state with 3 other maps available to play, I don't understand why that map even exists to play on as of now. The spawns are unbalanced, there were people all the way at the edge of the map that I could barely see, and it was a very one-sided map for spawns, play locations, and even site holds for game modes like HP and King of the Hill. If it's still a map that's being worked on, maybe it's best to just remove it for now and stick with the other 3 amazing maps that are available to play, rather than just putting a placeholder map for the sake of having it. On the first map that I had started with, there was a ledge along the entirety of the map that could be walked across, and unfortunately there were a couple head glitches that came with that ledge location. Not fully a con, but it's certainly something that I had a slight issue with, especially when I can barely see the person and almost not being able to hit them at all. After all of that, and for a game in a pre-alpha state, I think it's certainly one that's going to grow and improve constantly with further updates. It's a super fun arcade shooter with some great weapon models, easy to understand game modes, varying ranges of maps, and more. It's honestly one of the most anticipated games that I will certainly keep an eye on for myself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look into Adrenaline and made it this far, make sure to like and subscribe. It's a free way to help me out, and I appreciate it as always. Consider becoming a member by hitting the join button down below, taking a spot on the end member credits on the end of every single one of my videos, emotes to use in comments and live streams, as well as roles and channels in my Discord linked in the description below. It's a great way to support me further, and I appreciate it greatly. Thanks again for watching. I've been Miko, and I will catch you in the next video.